take their seats.
So this is your pavilion? No, it's CI's made. We were co-funding with CI and Fund Watching with the three of us. We have three. As you should.
All right, I think we can get started. So thank you all for attending this session. Thank you to our hosts, Conservation International, and of course IDB for this lovely pavilion, and to the esteemed panelists who will be talking today about multilateral and national development banks and their role in driving global South nature finance innovation and financing. And to answer this question, we have a superb panel from the leading multilateral and national development banks from the key countries, and some of our expert practitioners from the field who can share insights and experiences on how to do nature finance at a national multilateral development bank. So we have from Brazil, from BNDES, Odette Lima Campos, who's the Environmental Area Service Coordinator. And then from South Africa, from the Development Bank of South Africa, Moho Mataba. She is a climate finance specialist. And then Gregory Watson from the IDB, Principal Specialist on Biodiversity and Natural Capital. We're also expecting somebody from the Asian Development Bank who will probably walk in a little bit later. And, it goes without saying that MDBs and national development banks really have a critical role to play in catalyzing nature finance. So they are the conduits through which we channel the funds that we need from the capital-rich global north to the nature-rich global south. And we've all heard the numbers now many times over. There's Duncan. Welcome, Duncan. So Duncan Lang from the Asian Development Bank. And he is the Senior Environmental Specialist in ADB's Environment Cluster within the Climate Change and Sustainability Development Department. Thank you for joining us. So we've heard the numbers now many times over. 800 billion is the nature finance financing gap. And of that, I came across a recent study by OECD that did a mapping of biodiversity-oriented funding. In 2022, they estimated that that was in the order of $15 billion. So, really well short of where we need to be. And that number, the target for that number, according to the OECD, is 30 billion by 2025. So we really have a lot of catching up to do. But it is also subject to a lot of barriers. And we see these likely to get worse, which is why we need development banks that are on the ground and rooted in these economies to be able to tap into global capital markets and mobilize domestic financing for biodiversity. We have still seats in the front for those who are coming in. And so how do they do this? Of course, there's direct financing of nature through concessional credit and technical assistance. So from those $15 billion that I cited, the study estimates that around 2/5 come from multilateral development banks. Half is roughly from bilateral lenders and creditors. And then they also de-risk nature finance transactions, and we'll hear a lot about that. So as we all know, biodiversity projects are subject to very low and uncertain returns. This is reflected in the work that we do at Nature Finance, and I should have introduced myself. I'm Aaron Kuhlenkampf. I'm the director of the Sustainability-Linked Sovereign Debt Hub, where we look at the intersection of nature finance and sovereign finance. And one of the biggest challenges that we encounter is, of course, the high cost of financing for sovereigns and nature finance in particular. And these returns then are reflected in the private capital flows to nature finance cross-border, which this same OECD study puts at around 10%. So there really needs to be a bigger effort in this regard in mobilizing private capital for nature finance. And just to remark that we are the secretariat for a task force that was launched at COP28 on credit enhancement for sustainability-linked sovereign financing of nature and climate. And here at COP16, we will be soft launching the first set of deliverables, which are a set of principles around how to do credit enhancement for sovereign finance. And of course, it is a convening of multilateral development banks and development finance institutions that includes the Inter-American Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and we thank you for your contributions. And then lastly, aside from directly financing nature and de-risking finance, there's also de-risking innovation. So financial markets, of course, are by their nature very conservative and have a predilection for simplicity in our work and our engagements with investors. We come across this all the time. They want simple structures, stable cash flows, but the reality is that biodiversity is complex. And so the solutions need to be complex sometimes as well. So they have thin margins, but also these are new instruments, very innovative instruments that we'll hear about. There's new types of data that, especially sovereigns have never had to deal with. So geospatial data, analytics, it's very outside of the realm of sort of traditional macro-fiscal debt management, and new business models. And so we, are seeing that MDBs and NDBs are really incubators of innovation in this space. They are the first movers, oftentimes, as we'll hear about, and they're critical in developing proofs of concept, as well as providing catalytic seed capital. So I could say that few development banks in this space can rival the IDB in terms of innovation in nature finance, as we've been hearing here in COP and we'll be hearing more about, no doubt, in the coming days. So I'd like to start with you, Greg, if I can, to hear about what IDB is doing to drive innovation in nature finance and more broadly your initiatives and projects on the ground. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to start talking about the IDB, and maybe later we'll talk about some of the financial instruments and also the joint MDB work, because I think MDBs are really working together as a system, and I see some of them in the room. But at the IDB, since 2018, we've really been focusing on this agenda, and it's just been growing and growing. Just this year in our new institutional strategy, we've placed nature at the heart. It's both an area for vertical investment, but also for horizontal mainstreaming across the whole bank group. And we just approved an action plan with metrics for the entire bank group that shows how we'll do this all the way from our country programming and our country dialogue, through tracking, through specific activities with different sectors, and different financial instruments. And this all kind of is the root, comes from the root of the Joint Statement on Nature, People and Planet in Glasgow that has 5 pillars, and we're trying to really advance on all 5 of those, and also align to the GBF, obviously. So what does that mean in practice? It's a lot of buzzwords. So, internally we have teams working sectorally, scanning the entire pipeline for opportunities to integrate nature as a solution. We have, in our country dialogues, support to governments that are working to mainstream. So, for example, Chile, we're working with their Natural Capital Committee, which brings together Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, Central Bank, Ministry of Economy, and helping them bring nature's values into the policy realm, both for policy decision making, but also to create new investment frameworks for nature. And we just approved a policy-based loan to Chile that includes a lot of policy metrics for creating that enabling framework for nature finance. And that's just one example there. We also are using our existing financial instruments in new ways. And so we're using our policy-based guarantee product to support debt for nature conversions, as I know you're super aware, where there's a set of policy commitments and for the future, and we can generate new finance for conservation by guaranteeing the issuance of new bonds. But we're also working on other types of bonds, Amazon bonds, results-based finance facilities, and also a really active set of work around biodiversity credits and tokens. So there's a lot going on at the IDB. That's just part of it, and we're really excited about it. So I know in some of the other future questions we'll get to go more deep in that, and also what we're doing together with other MDBs about metrics.
Thanks. That's tremendous track record so far, and looking forward to hearing more. Odette, BNDES, made some big commitments yesterday, I believe, and is really ramping up in the biodiversity finance space. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about some of your initiatives and projects and what you've learned so far.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation. So the Brazilian Development Bank is one of the largest development banks in the world. Last year, we disbursed around $20 billion to more than 150,000 clients. We support clients of all sizes and with different profiles. Our set of financial solutions include loans, but also securities underwriting, granting for non-refundable projects, structuring of concession projects, and public-private partnerships for the public sector. For Brazil, the biodiversity and nature agenda is an agenda of opportunities. At this conference, as was said, BNDES is launching its commitment and strategy to nature action. We have a specific report that shows how we managed to contribute to the achievement of all 23 goals of the GBF. But today I would like to highlight our support to the ecological restoration projects. We started this support with non-refundable resources, grants, in 2009, using a small portion of the BNDES profits. We learned a lot from these projects and from this initiative, and in 2021, we managed to bring the private sector together to support this kind of projects. So our mainly initiative is called Living Forest, and is a match funding initiative with a total amount of 500 million reais, half from BNDES and half from other partners, such as private companies, subnational governments, and other partners. The companies are from the food production sector, from the oil and gas sector, from the energy sector. And up to now, 5 calls for project proposals have been launched for investments in mangrove restoration, biodiversity corridors, conservation units. And to implement this initiative, we rely on the support of an implementation partner. There is Fumbio. Don't know if you are aware. This institution manages the resources that BNDES and the partner allocates to the initiatives, and they organize the call for projects, and they monitor these projects and monitor the results that these projects achieve. This initiative, Living Forest, this year received an award from the ALID, that's the Latin America Association of Development Financing Institutions. And we are very proud of this initiative, and we could scale it up if we have more private companies and subnational governments wishing to put money to this kind of restoration progress. We also support ecological restoration using credit instruments. We have concessional resources from the Climate Fund. That's a fund linked to the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And these resources can be used to support private companies that are emerging in Brazil for carrying out this kind of projects in large scale. And to foster this new economic sector, we have just updated our credit line for forests in order to apply a project financing approach to these projects and try to accept new types of collaterals, such as future revenues that our clients on restoration projects might have with carbon credit off-takers. I think that's it for the moment, and then we can talk a little bit more.
Wonderful. Thank you, and congratulations on launching those commitments yesterday. Moko, DBSA, of course, has been a pioneer on the continent in driving forward innovation in biodiversity finance. Please share with us a few of the experiences and examples that you find most relevant.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the Development Bank of Southern Africa was established in 1983 under an act in South Africa. So it's a DFI that is owned 100% by the South African country, but we cover the entire continent. Our mandate spans the whole region, and ideally our aim is to support infrastructure development in the region, and also to ensure and also support the efforts that relate to regional integration and economical economic development across Africa. In terms of the sectors, we cover the bulk of the infrastructure sectors such as ICT, water, energy, transport, and social infrastructure as well, such as health, education, and human settlement. And predominantly, we support the public sector, but also support the private sector as well. And in terms of how we operate, we are involved throughout the entire project development value chain, from infrastructure planning to project preparation to financing, eventually to the maintenance of it. Therefore, due to the work that we do on the planning side, we work very closely with government and our national treasury. So in 2010, our government gave us the responsibility of venturing into the climate change mitigation and adaptation. They gave us a grant of 1 billion rand to explore, and the experiences that we gained through that fund enabled us to build a track record that eventually enabled us to obtain accreditation with the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Fund, and the momentum has been building up since then until where we are today, and we are well on our way to recognizing ecological infrastructure as core infrastructure for the bank. We've also developed the biodiversity strategy that the bank uses in order to invest in the region. So one of the projects that I'd like to highlight today is the wildlife conservation bond that focuses on lions, African lions in South Africa. So we work very closely with the Rand Merchant Bank, which is a private commercial bank in South Africa, and the model pretty much mirrors the rhino bond that many of you may be aware of, that was implemented by the World Bank. And the idea is to work closely with the institutional investors to capitalize the bond itself, to subscribe to the bond, and to also have outcome-based funders to capitalize the success payments of the bond. So for people who are not familiar with the outcome-based bond, the idea is that the funds that are raised through the subscriptions are used to finance the collateral assets, and the coupons that are repayable to the institutional investors are only paid partially. So they only get, for example, let's say if the coupon rate was 10%, they would get 8%, and then the 2% would be used to finance the conservation projects underlying in the program. And then based on the successful implementation of the projects, they would then be repaid the 2% that they forgone. So if the project attained 100% success rate, they would get the entire 2% back. But if the project attained 50% success rate, they would get 50% of that, and the remaining 50% would be paid back to the outcome-based funders. So we are currently in the process of, so the aim is to issue the bond in March next year, 2025, and the size of it will be around 219 million USD. And the envisaged interest return rate for that bond is in the range of 140 bips to 180 bips. And we're also in the process of approaching outcome-based funders to capitalize that fund, which we are envisaging to be around 19 million USD. We're also in talks with the Global Environment Facility to assist us with that, but we'll also be capitalizing that outcome-based fund. And for people who are interested to participate, are welcome to also participate, as we're still in the very initial stages of establishing that bond. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So for those in the room who want to invest in conservation, there's a clear opportunity coming up next year. So another notch in the belt of conservation outcome bonds. Duncan, I was at the launch of the Nature Solutions Finance Hub last year at COP28, and have seen the tremendous work that you're doing, not only Hub, but across ADB in driving forward biodiversity finance. Could you share some of those experiences and examples?
Thank you. So I think probably it's good to maybe set the scene for ADB, because who we are, we're a fairly big bank, but we're regional, and a lot of our work is historically focused on, more traditional infrastructure per se. We have, though, brought in environmental policies, maybe going back to 2002, sorry, I should say. And a lot of what we did originally was driven by kind of compliance, safeguards, and that kind of thing. But increasingly, we are seeing this sort of push towards the positive agenda. And I think it's been really interesting this last week, spending time with our peers to discuss about the nature mainstreaming and nature positive and that whole dynamic. And I think probably what I would say for ADB in general is that a lot of what we're doing at the moment that has nature in it is probably nature mainstreaming. We have been doing that for quite a long time, and I think we're pretty good at it. In some of the projects we're doing, I think there's definitely room to get better. But what I would say is that goes all the way from infrastructure projects where we had a presentation at the beginning of this week from our colleague from Bangladesh, and a railway project where we've helped support the world's first elephant overpass in Bangladesh. We've done a lot of work with the Wildlife Institute of India, helping to build in nature-friendly infrastructure in projects in South Asia. So I think one of the things I would say is that you've got to get your house in order from a safeguards perspective before you can start getting into the nature positive side of the equation. And I think at the moment we're probably somewhere in the middle there. We have done quite a lot of tracking for our projects, and they give us sort of bigger numbers, but the actual amount that's really focused on nature is much, much smaller, and I think most of us agree on that. I think one of the things I would like to say is we have had some success stories in the last few years. We had a great project in China, which was in a place called the Kunming Hills, where we supported the restoration of 10,500 hectares of forest. That place was being, the local community were deforesting there, and that area is very important for pandas. So what they did was we built a botanic gardens. Then we would pay the farmers to do restoration and give them jobs as well in the botanic gardens, and that has resulted in the restoration of the forest and another stream of livelihoods, in terms of jobs and security, and the panda habitat has been restored. So that has been a real successful story for us. We've also done projects in wetlands, and I lead our regional flyway initiative. I mentioned to some colleagues the other day about a project we had in China as well, which was very good. So we are starting to see those come through. I would say the other thing is going back to the mainstreaming. One of the key things that we've also seen is that investing in nature per se doesn't have to be direct. And we launched in 2019 our Healthy Ocean Action Plan, and the majority of the work under that is about actually reducing pollution, plastic pollution and so on. And I think when we last counted this year, we'd actually financed about 3.94 billion in efforts to clean up the ocean one way or the other. And that often can mean, doing a wastewater treatment plant. It can do with restoring a landfill site that is polluting, single-use plastic legislation. We did a $500 million policy-based loan to the Indonesian government either this year or late last year, which was really focusing on plastic use. So these things are all, I would say, nature mainstreaming. They're not always positive, but they're actually trying to do threat abatement. I think one last thing I would probably say here is that we have launched, as you said, the Nature Solutions Finance Hub. Our colleagues from AFD are in the back there who have joined us on that. CI is involved, and we have a number of other partners. And really, the reason we wanted to do that is because we're not progressing fast enough. We're too slow. We need to scale up impact, and the crisis is not getting better; it's getting worse. So, the purpose of the hub is to try and fast track that effort, and come up with innovative financing solutions. That's why you're involved to help us with that. And I hope that hopefully it will come up with some good projects. And we have, you and I are talking to the Thai government, for example, about trying to do something with them. And we want to try and bring that innovation to scale up. And I think that's the purpose of it. So, and I would say last thing is that all of these conversations been having, I think, are very positive. We're going in the right direction, so maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And you're absolutely right. We need innovation for speed and mainstreaming for scale if we're going to get from those 20 billion to the 800 billion that we need. But I want to now go from the broad sweep of all the great initiatives that you have going on to focus a bit more on a few iconic examples, such as the lion outcome bond that you mentioned, and perhaps focusing on this idea that MDBs and NDBs are incubators of innovation, to hear a bit more about some of the financial instruments that you are working on and that you've seen have had measurable impact in promoting biodiversity. And which ones of those do you think have the greatest scale potential? Perhaps, this is for the entire panel, but maybe Odette, if you'd like to go first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll keep in the ecological restoration topic. We feel in the absence of bankable projects for this kind of business, we are helping the Brazilian public sector to establish partnerships with the private sector for the conservation and restoration of public forests and parks in Brazil. So as a development bank, we are helping to develop bankable projects for this topic. By now we have a contract with the Brazilian Forest Service to structure concessions for 7 federal conservation units, totaling more than 6 million hectares in forests. So this operation mode of project structuring, we think that's a very important role that development banks can play. In terms of scaling up the Living Forest Initiative, we launched last year at the climate conference a goal of restore by 2030 6 million hectares in the Amazon. We call the arc of restoration because today we have the arc of deforestation. That's the boundary of the Amazon. It's the most vulnerable region in the Amazon, and we established the goal to restore this area. Of course, we will need a lot of money, and BNDES alone will not be able to do it. But adding up to the non-refundable resources, we have credit lines, and we are trying to help this market that is very incipient to develop business models that we can finance and help integrate the developers of the projects with the off-takers of carbon credits or biodiversity credits to join them and trying to enable this ecosystem for restoration.
Thanks. Maybe to others on the panel, put slightly differently, what is your favorite nature finance instrument that you think has the greatest scale potential? Yep, Greg.
So I mean, there's like a menu, right? And I'm just going to do a plug because on the 28th, we're going to announce a new results-based finance mechanism with Colombia, and on the 29th, a framework for Amazon bonds that can aggregate basically bond issuances across countries, and also an ETF we're going to discuss for the Amazon. But leaving those aside, because we haven't announced them yet, I think some of the things that I'm most excited about are, besides the debt for nature swaps we mentioned before, is the biodiversity credits. And the international advisory panels coming out with the guidelines, I think today or tomorrow. We've supported biodiversity, or basically habitat banks and biodiversity credits in Colombia for some time with terrazos for compensation. But what we're seeing is moving that to the voluntary market because it's really the same mechanisms. It's the use of the credit that really distinguishes it. And you also see other tokens, right? Biodiversity tokens, which can be somewhat similar, and we've seen examples, incipient in other countries. how are we going to make those scale? I think is like the big question that everybody asks. Something we're really working on is taking the example and being inspired by the kinds of results-based outcome bonds you've mentioned, is how do we bring that together with biodiversity credit? So we've designed actually a model where the payments for the foregone coupons actually are paid by the issuance of biodiversity credits from the project that's funded with the, with the savings from the coupon. We think we've done the numbers, it'll work. We have the buyers. The question is the market's like skeptical, right? It's like Santa Claus. They don't believe in biodiversity credits. So what we're trying to do, and again, open to the audience if you want to talk later, is the first couple of transactions are going to need some sort of guarantee, right? So that we can show, look, the KPIs are met environmentally. Maybe for operate, it's the operator risk, right? There's like, what if this operator can't deliver the credits or can't sell the credits at the price that we need? We think it'll work. We need to prove that it can work. And I think, many, because this would be an IDB bond that we would issue to finance our own activities. Maybe 50% of it will go to sustainably linked activities. That would create massive opportunities with bond issuances. And then the other is, with the results-based payment mechanisms, we have something called IDB Klima for our own portfolio. It's modeled after Uruguay's Step Up, Step Down bond, where our own loans, if the countries basically agree to KPIs linked to their NBSAP or their climate commitments, they then will receive, in the third-party verification, they'll receive a discount on their borrowing from us. So it's a way to force the countries to take very seriously their NDC and their NBSAP, and also to put in place the MRV systems, because they can then finance projects. And so I'm super excited about both those.
Great, and equally excited, I guess, using moderator privileges, if I could say what my favorite instrument would be, it would be a biodiversity-linked outcome bond, which of course doesn't exist, but that's why we have the MDBs to kind of take that first step, validate that it can work, and then hopefully see a sovereign or a corporate pick it up and then get to scale. We have a fair amount of time. I don't know if others on the panel want to answer this question, or if we move to the next one, maybe Duncan.
Well, I can maybe just add something else. I'd say for one thing for us, because 3/4 of our business is with sovereign governments, the persuasion factor of getting them to do any borrowing with us for nature is still a challenge. And I think one of the things that we've found real success with recently is we've had some projects where we've used one of our instruments, which is called sector lending, where we invested in a particular sector, which was actually around coastal resource management, so kind of fishing and things like that. But what that allowed us to do using that modality is it allowed us time to actually get to know the community and get to find out the issues. Because the problem is with most of our lending is it's kind of time pressured. You need to get a deal done, you need to do this and that, and it's challenged to really find out what the root of the problem is. So in the case of a project that we had approved a few years ago in Cambodia, that was supposed to be on coastal resource management, and it was supposed to be helping the fishing industry to be more sustainable. Well, what they found out was that there were no fish, or they were all fry, because they'd been massively overfished. So that project, what it ended up being was a restoration project for the mangroves and seagrass. So the mangroves, they have the nurseries, and the seagrass are where the fish live. And they use this mechanism with a local NGO to put in concrete kind of hexagons within the seagrass, which was stop trawling. And that way, then the fish have gone up. There's now dugongs back there. So it's a real success story, but it's using a modality which allows time to work out a project properly. And that, I think, is something that we've learned that we now want to do more of, because it also helps us to change the conversation to see that valuing nature and investing in nature, which is exactly what's happened here, is going to give you that benefit in the long term. Thanks.
Thank you. And to the point about sort of the complexities of engaging with sovereigns and debt managers on these new types of innovations on biodiversity-linked finance is something that we really encounter when we engage with them, and we make the case for KPI-linked debt or debt for nature swaps. And you can really see that there is a capacity constraint there. As I said, this is new type of data. they're sort of accustomed to working with traditional macro fiscal statistics, and now we're saying, well, you also have to consider geospatial imagery and these sorts of analytics engines. And that is, there's a process, there's a time to adapt to that. So on this point about capacity building, would love to hear a bit more from you about your experience with not only sovereigns, but other issuers and stakeholders who need to build up that capability.
Thank you. I'd just like to maybe start off by saying capacity building and knowledge sharing is quite crucial in scaling nature finance, especially in the global south. As many of us are aware, most of the natural resources are located in the very remote areas. Some of the resources are located in the homelands where the land is owned by indigenous peoples and local communities. So it's quite crucial to ensure that in the projects that we undertake, we include the local communities in various levels of decision making, in various levels of planning, project implementation, and even project maintenance. So what we've learned, especially from one of the projects that we are undertaking in Zambia and Mozambique, is that the indigenous people and local local communities, they've got the knowledge and the intellectual property that has been gained and gathered over the centuries. And oftentimes we think that capacity building should flow from institutional entities to the communities, whereas it should run both ways. We also have a lot to learn from them, from the traditional practices that they've been using and employing over the centuries. And I think taking the best parts of the traditional practices and blending those with the best parts of the Western practices in managing and our natural resources will enable us to become more innovative and to achieve novel ways in dealing with nature conservation. And maybe if I can provide some of the examples that we have undertaken within the bank. We've got a project that we are implementing in Cote d'Ivoire. It's about nature reserve conservation, and the project is led by the local tribe in Cote d'Ivoire. So the local tribe lives in this nature reserve, and hence our capacity building initiatives focus mainly on supporting the community to come up with initiatives to develop more economic development activities to assist in terms of generating income for them. However, when it comes to the actual management of the nature reserve, this is something that they're quite comfortable with and they've been doing for years. And it's quite an interesting one for us because they are in the lead and we're merely supporting them from the economic perspective, also on issues relating to eco-tourism as an example. And then on one of the examples that we have is a project that we are undertaking in eThekwini, one of the cities in South Africa. It's an urban resilience project where the aim is to support the city with avoiding floods in the city, and we also work with the city of Cape Town in preventing droughts that since the country is quite water scarce. So we work closely with the communities and especially youth and women. They are quite involved in the project. They monitor the river system from the source to the mouth of the river, and they monitor indicators such as pH and turbidity and the pH, which is quite good to have youth and women involved. Part of the project is also deals with early warning system that alerts the community in cases of floods, etc. So that has also been one of the ways in which capacity building is transferred from the institutions to the local communities. On the one last project that I'll also touch on, is a project that's part of the Sustainable Cities Integrated Program that is run by the Global Environment Facility. And in this particular project, we've got secondary municipalities working hand in hand with the metros. Oftentimes we find that the big metros, they don't really work together with the secondary municipalities, and secondary municipalities are isolated from the resource perspective. They're not privileged to have sufficient resource, and from a capacity perspective, they don't have sufficient capacity to develop projects, and they're also remotely located, geographically speaking. So in this particular project, they work together, and we've got the transfer of knowledge coming from the metros to the secondary cities, and from the secondary cities back to the metros. And another beautiful thing about this program is that it's part of the global program that is led by the World Bank. So there are also opportunities to learn from how other cities across the world deal with issues of nature. And the Global Environment Facility also makes tools available for our cities to benefit from gender mainstreaming perspective, from knowledge management perspective, and some trainings also that touch on other elements. I mean, there was a mention of data, the importance of data, which is quite useful in enabling the investors like ourselves to make informed investment decisions on projects. So yeah, I'll pause there for now. Thanks.
Wonderful. Some real concrete examples of capacity building. I don't know if others would like to share maybe on sort of the sovereign level with some of the challenges, or at the corporate level on capacity building. Any thoughts?
Well, I could say, so ADB, we have an initiative called our Regional Flyway Initiative, and one of the things about that we've done in the countries that we've been working with is we've been trying to look at the ecosystem services for the sites that we've identified that are priority to the waterbirds. And so we've done a number of workshops in the different countries to actually, build capacity on ecosystem services assessment. And that's been really helpful because it's allowed the site managers, the local people, to understand what their site is giving them, that perhaps they'd never really understood before. But it also helps us from potentially to give an economic imperative why you should do an investment there. Just one example for one site in Cambodia again, we identified that in a rice landscape in the lower Mekong, that for every $1,000 that the rice farmers would make, they're spending 700 on inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, and at the same time, they've seen a 70% drop in their fish catch. So, that really tells us a terrible story, but also from a development bank, it tells us something, well, this is somewhere we could get involved. We could help transitioning these guys to more sustainable practices, which will get them better off in the end, but it'll also help, improve their fishings, and they're the main sources of income for those people. And all those things from a flyway perspective will also help the migratory birds. So that work, that building capacity is really helpful, and it can help them see the benefit of, again, investing in nature. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, there's also capacity building happening within and between MDBs and NDBs. One example being the Task Force on Credit Enhancement for Sustainability-Linked Sovereign Financing of Nature and Climate. It's a very long name. But this is an initiative that the ADB, the IDB, as well as 12 other MDBs and NDBs and DFIs are participating in. And it's about sharing experiences, examples, knowledge about how to optimize credit enhancement for nature-linked sovereign financing. So I was hoping to hear a bit more about some other initiatives of how MDBs are building global partnerships amongst themselves to drive this space forward.
Sure, I think I'll take that. So MDBs are really working together as a system, and I want to emphasize that. I think, on this topic, we were not as organized as we are now, and this momentum is really fantastic, and we're learning from each other on different things. And so I'm going to walk you through a few things that MDBs are doing together. One is, since the joint statement came out, we started working on how to report nature finance. And we worked very closely with the EIB, who's in the room, and the other MDBs to help to come up with common principles for tracking nature positive finance. And we released that document in Dubai, and we've all been piloting those approaches using the World Bank's methodology within our institutions so that we have a baseline of what is our nature positive finance. And another plug, our senior management will release the IDB's number on the 29th. And so, for the first time, we'll know where we stand, because if you don't measure it, you can't track it. But beyond that, this year, as our president held the presidency of the MDB working group for MDB heads, we had a viewpoint note. And for the first time, that actually included 2 activities on biodiversity. One was the tracking, but the other is a new initiative with MDBs to work on a harmonized set of KPIs for financial transactions. And because I always call it we're growing a bush. We have, ISSB, the other standard setters, TNFD, coming out with frameworks. We have, on another side, we have IUCN, the scientific organizations, the NGOs. Then we have our own financial products and financial products from the market. They all have different KPIs. And we all work, most of us, with countries on taxonomies and other things like that. We're actually supporting many institutions and countries on that. They're all slightly different. So we're spending a lot of energy growing something bushy. We need to align so it grows tall and fast. And so we're trying to do that work now. Again, with the EIB, we co-led a workshop with the MDBs a couple of days ago to start to get inputs, working with the Nature Positive initiative as well, who's starting to do this work, so that we can publish something by COP30 in Belém that will help to scale finance faster. And then I'd say the last place where we're working, there's 2 other areas we're working together quite closely. MDBs are working on a biodiversity data system, which I'm not involved in, so I'm not going to talk about much. But also we've been working with ADB and with the World Bank and with Stanford University on doing integration of natural capital assessments, valuations into the policy and planning and investment decisions of governments. And we have 5 pilots. ADB has 5 pilots. There's a couple of projects in Africa. And so we're also collaborating on that so that we're not using different frameworks, and we can actually bring the countries together from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America to share experiences. And so that's been super powerful.
Harmonized KPIs is music to my ears. Maybe we'll open it up now for questions in the group, and there's already one right here. I don't know if we can share a mic.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to the panel for the fantastic insights. My name is Işık Girgiç. I'm a PhD researcher from Utrecht University, based in the Netherlands. And so some of the discussions have touched upon the role, the monitoring role of the multilateral banks on tracking or monitoring the results. Of course, results, we understand them mostly as positive, but there might be also negative results. And by negative results, I mean the unintended negative consequences or trade-offs or negative spillover effects. So my question is, do you have any mechanisms in place or any practices in place to track or monitor any potential unintended negative outcomes so that the overall impact of a funded project is net positive? And one relevant instrument that comes to mind, of course, is the Jeff's safeguards on economic, social, and environmental safeguards. So maybe that can be a starting point, or maybe you have other practices in place. I would love to hear your insights on that. Thank you so much.
Well, that's a really good question, and I think, like, I've spent most of my career actually doing safeguards work, in actual fact, and ADB will actually be launching in November our new environmental and social framework, which will align us a lot more with IDB and World Bank, etc. Every project we finance has to meet our requirements, and if it doesn't, then it's non-compliant and we're in trouble. You have to go through a rigorous process by which you assess the potential impacts. And then if you have to disclose the information, you have to do stakeholder engagement and all those good things. Those requirements would still apply even if we were thinking that the project was going to be nature positive. It doesn't matter, because all modalities that we all have, you still have to meet those safeguard requirements. And you're right, there can be. I think the one that we see that worries us is maladaptation. That is a big worry. Like, if you apply a nature-based solution for a flood, protection project, and then you're thinking, we want to go green, we want to get rid of the grey, we want to just put in this nature-based solution. If it fails, then people's lives could be at risk, So that's the type of thing that we need to be very, very careful. But you would need to be with your safeguard standards anyway, and that due diligence and all that work would still need to be there. It doesn't matter if it's nature positive or if it's a traditional road or a power station. Thanks.
If I can if I can also add to that, in addition to the regular monitoring exercise that we do on an annual basis, we also have an external evaluator that evaluates our project when a project reaches the midpoint and also at the end of the project. So we'll have a midterm review, and which is really quite helpful and insightful because we have an insight from someone who is not close to the project, and we look at the project with fresh eyes, and that really usually brings up to the surface some things that we are not aware of. And if there are negative things that are identified, then we're able to pivot and to ensure that we employ adaptive management to avoid such things from really happening or increasing in scale. And then at the end of the project, we also conduct a terminal evaluation to assess how far we have achieved things.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Marcelo Furtado from Nature Finance. My question is for Odete. There is a view from a multilateral development bank and there's a view of a national development bank. And sometimes the connection is not ideal. What would be the ideal connection to make this flourish? What are the things in your experience that didn't happen so well that could be improved, or things that happened really well that you would use as an example of things for us to consider exploring and doing more in the future?
If I can maybe take a first bite on that, I think maybe adding to the point that was raised by Gregory, he indicated how closely MDBs work together. They work together to develop common principles and develop frameworks and certain, strategic documents. And oftentimes, public development banks and national development banks like ourselves are excluded in such, discussions. So I think, especially when it comes to issues that relate to nature, everybody has to be involved. Public development banks have to be involved in such discussions because we are much closer to the communities in which we implement projects. We have got much stronger relationships with our governments, and therefore we are able to share insights that most multilateral development banks wouldn't have access to. But oftentimes we don't really have a voice in such, discussions. And this is why the DBSA and the BNDS and other national development banks are part of the International Development Finance Club. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. And the idea of the establishment of that club is to ensure that we have a much stronger voice and we are able to have access to the tables that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to. So I think for me, it's quite important to ensure that in the those wonderful things that MDBs, do, they become a lot more inclusive and they work closely with us because we've got certain advantages that we could bring to the table and that would benefit such discussions. Thanks.
So BNDES tries to collaborate and exchange experience with different partners of the financial sector inside the country and outside the country. So we take part in forums like the IDFC and different other forums that we try to exchange experience. Because as she said, we have a unique position in the country that enables us to coordinate efforts between the public sector, the private sector, and also the third sector. So we have a capacity to get everyone together and develop new solutions and implement these new solutions in the country perspective. And the document that we are launching here at this conference, it's an effort to share all our experience that we have in this nature agenda that started in 2009 with the Amazon Fund, and then we are carrying on until by now and trying to improve scale of the initiatives. But we think that I invite you all to take a look at the document. It's in bnds.com.br biodiversity. There in this document, we try to put everything that we have from sanitation projects that help to control and reduce pollution, until these restoration projects and initiatives that I mentioned here. And that's what we're trying to do, to show our experience, to hear from you how and what can we improve, and to establish new partnerships and new cooperations for this agenda.
Are you financing some projects in Argentina? I'm from Córdoba, Argentina, and we are working with Juliana, but we are very interested in generate a new market there with biodiversity. We are working on that. I'm subsecretary of biodiversity. We are trying to make our first steps tracking the ecosystem, the services in our province, so we could apply to some of your products. But are you actually trying working with some projects in our country? We're very interested in talk later about our projects. We have one particularly that is of restoration, ecological restoration in our province. It's very solid. It's very with local governments too. We are a regional government, subnational, but it is very solid. We are trying to show that project to all organisms that are making financing this project. So that's the question. I would like to know if you have some projects in Argentina, and later talk a little bit with you.
So I'm probably the most likely one to be financing projects in Argentina, and we can check because I know we're already working together. But I think there's a broader question inside that, which is what do we do with cities and what do we do with subnationals? We had a session here just yesterday, or the days are blending together, but with the State Secretary of Environment of Rio de Janeiro, the Ministry of Transport of Guatemala, the Canadian government, which is funding a program with us, and we had the Mayor of Cali. All of those are subnationals. We're working with them on nature-based solutions. And so looking at both tools to integrate nature-based solutions into finance and into decision-making, but also very concrete projects. So example, in Mexico, looking at sponge cities. Here in Cali, looking at the master plan for the city and how to integrate biodiversity, but also how do you integrate Afro-descendants into the care of nature-based solutions. The project we're doing in Guatemala is using national forest incentives to pay local communities for conservation and restoration in the area of influence of a road project. And the last project in the state of Rio de Janeiro is looking at financing and implementing their master environmental plan for the watershed in the Bay of Guanabara, which is incredibly important and requires a lot of reforestation in the Mata Atlántica. So I think there's a lot that we all can do and I know there's a ton going on in Brazil that we probably all do at the subnational and city level.
Hi there, Nicole Rycroft with Canopy. We work with 1,000 brands to transform supply chains that are currently driving deforestation and forest degradation with a focus on paper, packaging, and wood-based textiles. And so thank you and congratulations to all of you for your work in the space. I know that bringing financing to nature-based solutions, to carbon solutions has been kind of long talked about. And so I think your leadership in this is really welcomed and appreciated. And I think one of the things that I think maybe Gregory spoke about it, but also Duncan, one of the elements that you spoke about is like how to move at, like how do we accelerate the scale and the scaling of these projects and the mobilization of capital. I think it'd be interesting to hear about how you're thinking about that, not just for nature solutions or kind of the conservation of biodiversity and landscapes and marinescapes, but also in the infrastructure transitions that are needed. So Duncan, when you were speaking about the plastic space and risk abatement, but especially with materials, which are so often off the radar of climate and biodiversity conversations and investment considerations. How do we scale that infrastructure transition so that we're fundamentally relying less on forest ecosystems to provide the fiber for the various commodities that we do, and that we're actually helping that transition to more circular production? And so how you're thinking about and grappling with the scaling of mobilization of investment to both of those streams would be interesting.
I think one thing I would say about this is we've had some interesting conversations at ADB with different departments, and one of the things that I find very frustrating is that investing in the private sector, at least, it's sometimes considered that investing in natural capital is considered high risk, and it really, I find it frustrating, because on the sovereign side we're all about that. We're all like trying to scale that up, and in terms of commodities, and this is really the business side of things. So I think one thing that we hope to do in the Nature Solutions Finance Hub is actually have a de-risking fund in it. And the reason for that is then you can take on those type of projects, and we can then talk to our Office of Risk Management and say, hey, we've got this de-risking element on this project, and so now it's, they would consider it as economically viable. So we hope that that can really change the situation. I think also, Greg is a big leader in this, but the natural capital accounting side of things, I think if that can actually be integrated into the thinking, then, that also switches the dial more in the direction of things that are positive from a nature perspective as well. Thanks.
If I could also add, I think from our side, what we've learned is that it's quite crucial to join forces with private sector. If we want to achieve scale, we have to join forces with private sector, because we need funds to flow from all sides. So similarly to what Duncan mentioned, the crux is to develop innovative financing models that will ensure that private capital is attracted into projects that they wouldn't otherwise consider as attractive, and we use de-risking elements. Will include credit enhancement elements and extend the tenure that we provide in terms of loans and provide grants. So it's a blend of all of those elements to come to an instrument that will eventually attract a bank that wouldn't typically look at a nature capital investment, for example. Thanks.
Just to add, I think that this transformation needs to include regulation. I don't think that the voluntary market or voluntary initiatives from the private sector will be able to do the transformation that the scale of the transformation that we need. The Brazilian government has launched some public policy in this way, like the ecological transformation plan. I don't know if you are aware of. There are information in the Brazilian government site, and other public policies like the strategy for bioeconomy also was launched this year. So we need to have public policy to foster this transformation. Otherwise, we won't be able to do it.
I just want to add 10 seconds on that, because regulation is super important, but I also think that there's a frontier, because at least our environmental safeguards policies, and I think many other institutions, are moving from no net loss to net positive, right? And so that is a powerful non-regulatory way, because if we're providing financing lines to corporate or through national development banks that are requiring net positive, we need a whole lot more net positive solutions on the market. It's one reason why I'm bullish on the habitat banks as a solution, but it's going to create a lot more demand. And I don't know why this mic keeps making these horrible noises.
Hi, Luana from Nature Finance as well. My question is, how can MDBs help national development banks to have better credit ratings for their financing rather than depending on their country credit rating. BNDES is, as I know, a good payer and suffers from this. So I'd like your comments on this, how we can do this interconnection. Thanks.
Well, I can start, but I'm sure Greg's got some good points to say on this, definitely. But I think one thing that we've been helping with the last few years is helping countries to support them issuing their own bonds. And I think this is one mechanism by which we can potentially buy the bonds, which, and that then helps with them from a financial perspective, is because we can then crowd in others who wouldn't necessarily want to do it, because our AAA rating comes in to invest in the bond, and then the other investors will come in. So we've seen quite a lot of that in the last few years, where we've been helping sovereign green bonds, and we have a program. We've also been doing that with blue bonds as well. So I think probably it's an obvious mechanism we're already doing to try and help countries without the perfect situation from their fiscal situation. But that's just one that I know of that we do. But I know there are others. My colleague, if she was here, she could tell you all about it. But that's one I do know that we do. Thanks.
And just a couple of thoughts. So one is the linkage on the knowledge that you both mentioned. And I mean, one thing that the IDB, our Amazonia Forever program, has developed is, I think it's called the Coalition of Financial Institutions or something like that. But it's working with national development banks, with private financial institutions, and the IDB to find joint solutions. And I think BNDES is a key member of that. Another thing that we've done from the MDB side is we're working with some national development banks with toolkits to implement TNFD. And so we developed that, and we're piloting that in 2 national development banks right now. And then the last is we do lending to national development banks. So I've been a member of 2 projects, where one with COFIDE in Peru, where we actually are lending to them for them to on-lend to bioeconomy, basically biodiversity positive bioeconomy projects. And so we've also done that in Ecuador, and I know we're looking at that in other places too. And I'm sure we've done, I may not know about it, but I'm sure we've done a lot also with BNDES on this kind of work as well. So they can use our AAA basically for the rates that we are able to lend, and then there's a margin there that allows you to work with maybe a segment of the production population that you don't usually get to work with.
Okay. Well, I think we've really had a broad sweep of some examples. We're only really just touching the surface here of all the good work that is being done at the MDBs and NDBs. I find it very inspiring. I think, like Duncan, we can take some confidence and bullishness about this space, and that we'll get to mainstream eventually and close that gap. So thank you for a really great panel, to our esteemed panelists and to you all. And look forward to the next session.